From Christmas Eve heartbreaks to thrilling last-minute wins that clinch the playoff spot, we've seen it all from the Jets over the last quarter century. Let's continue breaking down the greatest wins and the worst losses of the last 25 years today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, June 18th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we're going to continue counting down the greatest Jets wins and the worst Jets losses of the last 25 years. It's part of a bigger series on the show. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to take a look back on the last quarter century of Jets football because we are now through 25 of the 100 seasons of the 21st century. On yesterday's show, we started breaking down the 10 greatest wins and the 10 worst losses. We went 10 through 7 on both lists. So if you need a refresher, we went 10 through 7 on the worst losses. My number 10 worst loss was the 2011 season finale against the Dolphins. Number 9 was a Week 16 game in 2000 against the Lions, which cost the Jets a playoff spot as John Hill missed a chip shot field goal that would have sent the game to overtime. Number 8 was the 2012 Thanksgiving night loss to the Patriots where the butt fumble happened. And number 7 was the 2009 AFC Championship game where the New York Jets lost to the Indianapolis Colts with a spot to the Super Bowl on the line. So we continue now. My number 6 worst loss of the last 25 years, and I think a lot of people are going to tell me this loss is ranked too low on the list, but I'm going with Week 16 of 2011, Christmas Eve. The Jets were defeated by the New York Giants. It was a critical game for both teams. It was not quite an elimination game. Even though the Jets lost, they stayed mathematically alive in the AFC playoff race, but it was a critical game for both teams. The Giants needed to win that game in order to control their own destiny heading into the playoffs. The game got off to a good start for the Jets. They rolled down the field on their first offensive series. Mark Sanchez hit Josh Baker for a touchdown. The Jets took an early 7-0 lead, and it felt like they were in control through the first quarter. They led the game 7-3, and then one of the most infamous plays in Jets history happened early in the second quarter. The Giants faced a 3rd and 10 from their own 1-yard line, and Eli Manning hit Victor Cruz on a short pass. Victor Cruz was a guy who made his NFL debut in a preseason game against the Jets a year earlier and scored 3 touchdowns. So Cruz, even though it was preseason, had a history of performing well against the Jets. On that play, Antonio Cromartie and Kyle Wilson missed tackles. Eric Smith took a bad angle, and Cruz ran 99 yards for a touchdown. At that point, the Giants took control of the game. The Jets' offense really couldn't do much from that point forward, and the Giants iced the game on a couple of Ahmad Bradshaw touchdown runs. Giants ended up winning the game 29-14. Sanchez had a brutal game. I mean, for some reason, the Jets had Sanchez throw the ball 59 times, took a terrible sack near the end of the first half that made a field goal attempt by Nick Folk longer. Folk missed it. Jets also had a field goal and also had a safety in the second half of this game. It was ugly. And many people look back on this game as kind of like a turning point for two franchises because the Giants, who were on the cusp of playoff elimination, ended up getting on a roll. And they ended up winning the next week against the Dallas Cowboys to clinch the NFC East title and then won 4 straight games in the playoffs to take home their second Super Bowl in 5 seasons, while the Jets finished an end of the year collapse, losing 3 straight games. This was the second straight of their 3 losses. The next week they lost to Miami in a really ugly game that was on our list. Actually, that was one of the games we mentioned yesterday. So you lose to you lose to your crosstown rival. You end up missing the playoffs. The season ends up falling apart. Your crosstown rival uses the win as a springboard to win a Super Bowl. Why is this game not higher on the list? Well, for me, the answer is quite simple. While this game is remembered as kind of like the turning point in the Rex Ryan era, because Rex Ryan went to the AFC Championship game his first 2 seasons. This was year 3. And this was the point where things started falling off. And people view this as kind of like the point where the Jets franchise started to backslide under Rex Ryan. The reality is I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that this Jets team was as good as the 2009 and 2010 teams. And I felt like going into this game, this Jets team was really weak because they didn't have the offensive line they had in 09 and 10. They didn't have the run game that they had in 09 and 10. The team was just not as good. And even if the Jets had made the playoffs that year, and I felt like this heading into the Giants game, they weren't going to go very far. I mean, this was a couple of weeks after the Jets lost back-to-back games. They were 5-3. They lost to the Patriots, who were also 5-3 with first place in the AFC East on the line. They got crushed on Sunday Night Football. Then 4 days later was the infamous Tebow game where the Jets lost to Denver, a ridiculous loss that made the honorable mention in worst losses. Jets fell to 5-5 at that point. And that was the point where I realized this team just wasn't that good. This team wasn't going anywhere. Then the Jets went on a 3-game winning streak, but it was deceptive because they just ended up with a really soft spot in the schedule. They lost to they beat a bad Buffalo team in a game Buffalo should have won. The Jets were very lucky to win that game. They followed that up with a very soft win over a Washington team that really was awful. And then they crushed a really bad Chiefs team. The next week before the Giants, and this was the week before the Giants game, the Jets went to Philadelphia and faced an Eagles team with high expectations. Maybe one of the most disappointing teams in the NFL, the 21st century, other than the 2024 Jets. This was the year they signed Nnamdi Asomugha, they signed Asante Samuel, they brought in all these big names. And they were a huge disappointment, but they crushed the Jets. And so Jets headed into this game 8-6 off of a bad loss to the Eagles. They've been beaten by good teams every time they face good teams all year. The Jets team just wasn't going anywhere. And while it's remembered as kind of like the turning point in the Rex Ryan era, the fact of the matter is like the 2011 team wasn't that good. If they had made the playoffs, they probably would have been one and done. Now, from the Giants' perspective, this game was very important because it helped them springboard to a championship. So there's an element of that. And this was kind of like the game where the 2011 Jets were finished off. But I just can't put it higher on the list because the team wasn't that good to begin with. And so I have to push back on the idea that the 2011 Jets were like this team that was destined for glory until they ran into the Giants. 2011 Jets just weren't that good. Now let's move on to the sixth best win. So going back to our list yesterday, number 10 was Week 1, 2011, the win over the Cowboys. Number 9 was the 2000 win over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when Wayne Corbett caught the game-winning touchdown after Keyshawn Johnson spent the week trash-talking him. Number 8 was the win over the 2015 Patriots, Week 16, which kept the Jets alive in the playoff race. And number 7 was the 2010 wild card win over the Colts, where the Jets avenged their loss in the AFC Championship game a year earlier. At number 6, I actually have another playoff game against the Colts. It was the 2002 wild card game, which the Jets won 41-0, a game where they just blew the Colts out of the building. I mean, it started early with a little swing pass Richie Anderson caught that he weaved through Colts defenders. They couldn't bring him down. He ran all the way to the end zone on a 56-yard touchdown catch and run. And the Jets just dominated. The Jets ended up going ahead 24-0 at halftime. Chad Pennington played a magnificent game. There was really, through 3 touchdown passes, Lamont Jordan ran for 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. Curtis Martin added 67 on the ground. It was just a flawless performance by the New York Jets in the middle of a string where the Jets were playing phenomenal football. In fact, this was part of probably the best three-week stretch of Jets football since the turn of the century, because they went into a Week 16 game against Brady and Belichick in Foxborough against the Patriots, needing a win to keep their playoff hopes alive. They went in there and controlled the game and dealt the Patriots a big loss. The next week, they crushed a Packers team that was going for the 1 seed in the NFC. In the final week of the regular season, Jets ended up winning the AFC East by dominating a Green Bay team, which was very good. And then the following week, they blow the Colts out 41-0. So that's a 3-week stretch where the Jets outplay a team quarterbacked by Tom Brady, a team quarterbacked by Brett Favre, and a team quarterbacked by Peyton Manning. And there really have only been 2 stretches in all the years I've been following the Jets where it felt to me they were on the cusp of being a consistent contender. One of those 2 stretches was early in the Rex Ryan era, those first 2 years, where the Jets went back-to-back AFC Championship games. Really felt like they were putting the pieces together. Obviously, it didn't happen. The second time was this stretch in 2002 when Chad Pennington was in his first year as a starter. It felt like he was rising, and the Jets were blowing out teams with really good future Hall of Fame quarterbacks. Pennington was in his first year as a starter, and he was just dealing. Again, he threw 3 touchdown passes in this game. This was a game where nothing went wrong for the Jets, a playoff game where absolutely everything went right. And it also doubles as the last time the Jets were the home team in a playoff game, all the way back in 2002. In fact, I've been a Jets fan for over 30 years. I've only seen 2 home playoff games in all the years I've followed the Jets. The 1998 divisional game against Jacksonville and this game in the wild card round against the Indianapolis Colts. But they were both good memories. The Jets won both games, and this was one of the most dominant Jets performances in a big game you will ever see. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll continue with our list of greatest wins and worst losses. Coming up, we have a victory in San Diego in a game where the Jets were underdogs, but probably should not have been underdogs. And we have a very painful loss that essentially finished the season in week 3. We'll talk about those as we continue here on this countdown edition of Locked On Jets. Episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place so you can stop managing your money and start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you'll realize just how much you're spending on food delivery. Now you can budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan your long-term goals. Managing your money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can even track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we're continuing our countdown, the greatest Jets wins and the worst Jets losses of the last 25 years. We are a quarter of the way through the 21st century in the NFL. So it seems like a good time to look back on the moments that define the first 25 years of the century for the New York Jets. We continue now, the number 5 worst loss. And this is a game nobody really remembers, but I was devastated. This was, to me, was one of the worst losses the Jets ever had. It was week 3 of 2005 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the 2005 season, kind of gets lost in the memory of Jets fans, but the Jets entered that season as a very trendy Super Bowl pick. This was a year after they almost went to the AFC Championship game. The year before was 2004, when they lost that heartbreaking game in Pittsburgh, where Doug Bryan missed 2 field goals in the final 2 minutes of the fourth quarter that would have given the Jets the win. And then the Jets ended up losing in overtime. The Jets had a very splashy offseason that year. They ended up trading for Lavernius Coles, who had departed the team just 2 years earlier in free agency. They also signed Ty Law, a future Hall of Fame corner. So this was a team that almost made the AFC Championship game and added a couple really big name players. But by the end of week 3, their season was over. And that had to do a lot with the quarterback situation. Chad Pennington was coming off a very serious shoulder injury. In fact, he required surgery in the offseason. And it felt like in the first 2 weeks, he was not fully healthy. The Jets had also signed a backup quarterback, Jay Fiedler, who had a lot of starting experience. So the mindset going in was, Fiedler wasn't great, but Fiedler was kind of like a hold the fort type of guy. If Pennington wasn't fully healthy, Fiedler would be able to go in and, at least do a credible job. Unfortunately for the Jets, the season completely fell apart in that week 3 game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. It was an overtime loss. It was a game where nothing went right for the Jets. And the 2005 season got off to a shaky start anyway. The Jets got annihilated week 1 in Kansas City. Week 2, they beat a Miami Dolphins team that was not supposed to be very good. The Jets beat them in the Meadowlands, but it was a very shaky win where the Jets kind of took control of the game in the fourth quarter, but they didn't look great. Through 2 weeks of the season, the Jets really did not look like Super Bowl contenders. Then came this game against Jacksonville. And in a span of 7 plays in this game, both the starting quarterback and backup quarterback suffered season-ending injuries. Pennington took a big hit in the third quarter, had to leave the game. Fiedler came in. 7 plays later, he took a big hit and had to leave the game. Then, incredibly, the Jets put Pennington back in. And you have to remember, he was coming off a serious shoulder injury. And he suffered a second serious shoulder injury, which ended up keeping him out the rest of the season. But they put him back into that game instead of going to their third-string quarterback, Brooks Bollinger. This game was a disaster for the Jets. Rookie punt returner Justin Miller muffed 2 punts, one of which got wiped off because of a penalty, the second of which set the Jaguars up for a go-ahead score in the fourth quarter. Pennington, with his arm hanging by a thread, was able to rally the Jets for a couple of field goals to send the game to overtime. But then Pennington threw an interception in overtime, which indirectly set up the game-winning field goal for Jacksonville. The interception flipped field position. Jaguars actually had to punt. Jaguars got the ball around midfield. They had to punt after the interception, but they pinned the Jets back deep in their own territory. And then the Jets, Ben Graham, Jets punter, ended up with a really shaky punt that essentially gave the Jaguars the ball in field goal range. Jaguars won the game. The Jets dropped to 1-2, but it wasn't just about the fact that the Jets dropped to 1-2. It's that they lost their starting quarterback and backup quarterbacks for the season. Jets ended up signing Vinny Testaverde off his couch. Vinny was in his 40s at this point. He was retired, and full credit to Vinny for volunteering to come back and help the team. But Vinny was pretty much past his prime. Vinny led the Jets to one win against Tampa Bay in his first start a couple of weeks later. But was really, he was a guy who was retired and came in during the season. He wasn't going to see, he wasn't going to be able to save the season. And what seemed like a promising Jets season on paper, was pretty much over by week 3. And this was one that, like, people don't think about as Jets heartbreaks, and people don't think about the 2005 season the way they think about 2024 or other seasons where we were expecting the Jets to be good and they just completely fell apart. Jets ended up going 4-12 in 2005. Really just an ugly season. The season that began with Super Bowl dreams. Anyway, let's move on to a happier note. My number 5 win is the 2001 Week 17 win over the Raiders. And this was a really gutty win by the New York Jets. The Jets entered Week 16 with a home game against the 2-12 Buffalo Bills. And it was a control your own destiny game. It was a win and in game. And the Jets lost at home to a 2-12 Buffalo team, which meant that to make the playoffs, they had to fly across the country to play a 10-5 Raiders team, which won the AFC West. So you couldn't beat a 2-12 team in your home building. Now you have to fly across the country, play on the road against the team that won its division. Odds are you're probably not going to win that game. The one thing I'll say, this is what I'll say about Herm Edwards. Was Herm Edwards a great coach? No. But Herm Edwards' teams were resilient. Herm Edwards' teams lost some horrendous games during his 5-year tenure with the Jets. And you have to get on Herm for those losses. And those losses are part of the story of why Herm's not a great coach. But Herm's teams got themselves off the mat, dusted themselves off, and then followed a lot of those terrible losses with huge wins. And I've come to appreciate how resilient Herm Edwards' teams have been when you compare them with the recent Jets teams, where whenever these recent Jets teams have faced adversity, they just completely fall apart. Herm Edwards led the Jets into Oakland, and the Jets got a huge win, a win that clinched the playoff spot. They beat the Raiders 24-22. This game was actually originally scheduled for week 2, but it was the week where the 9/11 tragedy happened. So the NFL canceled the week 2 games, or I should say they postponed the week 2 games. They moved all the week 2 games to the end of the regular season. So this turned into a week 17 game where the Jets needed to win to make the playoffs. This was a game with 6 lead changes. It was back and forth. The Jets and Raiders kept trading points, and it ultimately came down with just about a minute left to a 52-yard field goal attempt by John Hall. And I'm sorry, a 53-yard field goal attempt by John Hall. And Hall made it to send the Jets to the playoffs. And this was a measure of redemption, because you may remember yesterday we talked a bit about Hall in a game a year earlier against the Detroit Lions, a game which cost the Jets a spot in the playoffs in 2000, where Hall missed a 35-yard kick, a chip shot that would have sent the game to overtime. The Jets ended up losing that game to Detroit and missed the playoffs. Well, 1 year later, with the season on the line, a 53-yard kick, Jets were down by 1 with just about a minute left, and Hall delivered it. He nailed a 53-yard kick to send the Jets to the playoffs. Now, this game did not actually have a long-lasting impact. The Jets made the playoffs, and their reward was they had to go back to Oakland the next week and play this Raiders team, and the Raiders ended up beating them. But Herm Edwards in his first year delivered a huge win and got his team to the playoffs with an absolutely thrilling game. Again, a thrilling win. Again, the Jets won a game where there were 6 lead changes, including one on a 53-yard field goal with just about a minute left. Probably one of the greatest wins in Herm Edwards' tenure as Jets head coach. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about the 4th greatest win and the 4th most painful loss. 4th most painful loss, Brett Favre versus Chad Pennington. 4th greatest win came a year later. It was actually the Jets' next home game after that. We'll discuss as we continue here on this countdown edition of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Wednesday. We're continuing our countdown of the greatest Jets wins and worst Jets losses of the 21st century. We are now a quarter of the way through the 21st century. Let's continue now. Our number 4 worst loss. Week 17, the Jets lost to the Miami Dolphins, which officially eliminated them from playoff contention. Now, heading into this day, things looked kind of bleak for the New York Jets. In 2008, the Jets got off to an 8-3 start. It's famously the Brett Favre year. And down the stretch, things just did not go their way. At 8-3, they got blown out by Denver in a home game. The next week, they went out to San Francisco and lost to a really lousy 49ers team. Then it felt like the next week they kind of fixed things. It felt like they kind of caught a break that would change their season. They were about to lose at home to the Buffalo Bills. Then Sean Ellis delivered a strip sack late in the fourth quarter in a situation where the Bills are trying to run out the clock and are throwing the ball, which was a bit of a shaky decision. Ellis got a strip sack that was the fumble was recovered by Abram Elam, who ran it for a touchdown. So it felt like momentarily like the Jets season was back on track. However, 1 week later, the Jets went out to Seattle and lost to a bad Seahawks team that was playing without its entire offensive line, which was on injured reserve. This left the Jets in 2008, the final week of the season, needing help. They needed either Buffalo to beat New England or Jacksonville to beat Baltimore, neither of which seemed very likely. But the Jets also needed to take care of business themselves against the Miami Dolphins. And that seemed just as unlikely because the Jets were really struggling down the stretch. And this was just an ugly game. There's really no way around it. This was a Miami team that one season earlier had gone 1-15, and then they perhaps benefited more from the Favre trade than the Jets did, because when the Jets traded for Favre, it led them to cut Chad Pennington. Pennington ended up signing with Miami and having a really good season. He was, the Dolphins were really helped by the Wildcat that year. That was the year the Dolphins caught the league by surprise with the Wildcat. And that benefited Pennington because teams spent so much time during the week practicing to defend the Wildcat that they couldn't really develop a lot of complex coverage schemes. They had to run like a lot of very basic coverages, which Pennington, tore apart. This Jets-Dolphins game, Brett Favre threw 3 interceptions, each uglier than the last. I mean, one of them was a interception by Philip Merling in the second quarter Philip Merling was a defensive end. He ran it back for a touchdown to give Miami a 14-6 lead. Then in the fourth quarter, Favre's third interception came with the Jets trying to drive for a tying score. One side note of this game is it included the one play in his entire career that DeBrickashaw Ferguson missed. It was actually the last play of the game because the Jets essentially didn't put offensive linemen on the field. They were kind of like backed up against their own goal line, and they were running one of those plays where you complete a pass and then you just throw a bunch of laterals. I always thought it was kind of a smart move. They put Revis in at left tackle on this play. And the reason they did that is because when you're going to throw a bunch of laterals, you don't want to have an offensive lineman get a lateral. You want to have an athlete receive it. So the Jets actually had Revis play left tackle on that play. But in some ways, this was kind of poetic because the Jets pushed Chad Pennington to the curve. He ended up coming back and beating them. And the Jets replaced Pennington with Brett Favre, completely melted down with 3 interceptions. The 2008 Jets were a huge disappointment. And everybody remembers that season for Favre getting hurt down the stretch. Jets started 8-3, Favre got injured. And people say that was the defining point of the season. And I think that oversimplifies the way things went with the 2008 Jets. I do think the Favre injury impacted the team a lot down the stretch, but people forget that this Jets team was a bit of a paper tiger at 8-3. And then part of the reason I think people misremember the season is because the win that got them to 8-3 was a legitimately great win. They beat a Tennessee Titans team that was undefeated. So people remember they beat an undefeated Titans team. They were 8-3. They must have been a Super Bowl contender. Under the hood, this team was not as strong as that would suggest. They were very fortunate. They had a very soft schedule in October, a lot of very shaky wins against bad teams. They had a very soft win over a bad Cincinnati team. They had a game against an awful Kansas City team that they should have lost, that they somehow won. They lost to a bad Raiders team. Favre was much more up and down that season than people remember. I think people look at the touchdown interception rate at the time he was injured at 8-3 and say, "Oh, Favre was having a great season." Favre was very up and down that year, and the defense was not good. The Jets defense was just shaky that year. Eric Mangini and Bob Sutton were not good defensive coaches. Bob Sutton was a good assistant coach, but he wasn't a great defensive mastermind. I think if you had Bob Sutton as like a position coach or a defensive assistant, you were in good shape. As a defensive coordinator, I don't think he was quite up to the task. And Eric Mangini was just not a very good defensive coach. And beyond that, the coaching on this team was not good. Again, like Bob Sutton, good coach. I don't think defensive coordinator was the right role for him. Mangini was not a good defensive coach. Brian Schottenheimer was a bad offensive coordinator. So this loss hurt. And in an AFC that was wide open that year, because that was the year Tom Brady suffered a torn ACL week 1. So the Patriots, who were the dominant team in the conference, were, not really in the mix, even though they did end up winning 11 games. But the Patriots weren't dominant that year. So there was an opening for the Jets. But the team was not as good as people remembered. That said, I mean, it was a painful way to end the season with that collapse, especially losing at home to the guy you cut in the preseason at quarterback. A really disappointing way to end that season. My number 4 best win, it was the next home game the Jets had. It was week 2 of 2009 against the New England Patriots. This was a very memorable regular season game. This was a week 2 game. It was Rex Ryan's first home game as Jets head coach. And I think that it would be fair to say, if you remember the buzz heading into the 2023 and 2024 seasons for the New York Jets, it was comparable. Now, I don't think people necessarily thought the Jets were going to be Super Bowl contenders heading into 2009, but there was a lot of excitement because this was the first year of Rex Ryan, and Rex was talking the team up. He was saying, he had the famous line, "I'm not here to kiss Bill Belichick's rings," and the fan base was really fired up. Then came week 1, where the Jets went down to Houston and blew out the Texans. And this set up a showdown week 2 against the New England Patriots, the hated Patriots, the dominant team in the AFC East. The fan base was fired up. In fact, I watched this game from home. It's maybe the one time where I could feel the electricity of a crowd from my couch, just watching the game on TV, because the crowd was so loud in that game. You could tell that it was the rare game where Tom Brady was actually really rattled by an opposing crowd. The Jets had so many complex blitz schemes in this game. The Patriots could not block them. This is a game for another famous for another reason. Is if you ever rewatch this game, in the first quarter, Dan Dierdorf, who was the TV analyst for CBS in this game, mentions that they spoke with derailed Revis. They spoke with derailed Revis during the week, and Revis told them Randy Moss is going to be on Revis Island, and that was the first time the phrase Revis Island ever entered the lexicon. And essentially, there was the start. It was really kind of the kickoff point of Darrelle Revis's magical 2009 season. I mean, the week before he shut down Andre Johnson, who was an elite receiver, so that was obviously a big deal. But Darrelle Revis completely took Randy Moss out of the game. Randy Moss had 4 catches for 24 yards with Revis following him around. And another part that was great about this game was in the fourth quarter, the Jets were trying to hold a lead. They had held the New England Patriots out of the end zone the entire game. They led it 16-9, and they were trying to close the game out. How many times in that situation do you see a team that's been having success blitzing all game back off because they're afraid they're going to give up the big play? The Jets continued to blitz. The Jets continued to go all out blitzing on Tom Brady late in the fourth quarter as the Patriots were trying to mount a drive in the 2-minute drill, and they got a stop to end the game. And Dan Dierdorf, again on CBS, he referred to that as the anti-prevent defense. It made me so happy to see the Jets continue to attack, because one of the things that drives me nuts is when a team dominates a game playing one way for 58 minutes, then the last 2 minutes they change, because more often than not, when a team changes what's been working, things fall apart for you. So the Jets, despite a situation where a lot of coaches would go to a prevent, Rex continued to attack. The Jets had a win over the hated rival Patriots to start the 2009 season 2-0. It was a roller coaster season. The Jets ended up starting that season 3-0. They fell to 4-6 at one point, then rallied to finish 9-7 to make the playoffs with 2 playoff wins that got them to the AFC Championship game. But that win over the Patriots, even though it was a week 2 game, it wasn't a playoff game. It was all the way at the beginning of the season, week 2. But if you were a Jets fan there, you remember the magic of that game. You remember the electricity of the crowd. You remember a Jets defense rising to the occasion, and Tom Brady just having no idea what was coming at him. One of the rare times you've ever, not just against the Jets, one of the rare times in Tom Brady's career where he looked legitimately rattled between the pass rush and the crowd. Just a fantastic win for the New York Jets. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. So as always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody, and tune in tomorrow. We'll close out our series with the top 3 best wins and top 3 worst losses the New York Jets have had over the last 25 years.